Let me tell you about this one night I had while working as a truck driver. It's something that still makes me feel uneasy whenever I think about it. I've been driving trucks for years, so I'm pretty used to the long hours, the empty roads, and the feeling of being out there on my own. It's part of the job, and usually I kind of like the solitude. But this night was different. It was a few years back, and I was hauling a load of goods across state lines. I had a deadline to meet, so I was driving through the night, trying to make good time. The route took me through a lot of rural areas, long stretches of highway with nothing but fields and forests on either side. It was one of those nights where the sky was overcast, no moon or stars to light the way, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. Around midnight, I started feeling tired. I'd been on the road for hours, and the monotony of the highway was starting to get to me. I figured I'd keep an eye out for a rest stop where I could pull over, stretch my legs, and maybe grab a quick nap. After about 20 minutes, I saw a sign for a rest area up ahead, so I decided to take the exit. The rest stop was one of those old, run-down places you find out in the middle of nowhere. There were a couple of vending machines, a small building with restrooms, and a few picnic tables scattered around. There were only two other vehicles in the lot, a beat-up pickup truck and another semi-truck, parked way off to the side. The place looked deserted, which was fine by me. I pulled my truck into a parking spot, turned off the engine, and sat there for a minute, just listening to the quiet. I grabbed a bottle of water from my cooler, took a few swigs, and decided to get out and stretch my legs. The air was cool, and there was this damp smell, like it had rained recently. I walked around a bit, trying to wake myself up. I glanced over at the other truck parked at the edge of the lot. There was no one around, no sign of the driver. The cab was dark, and it didn't look like anyone was inside. I shrugged it off, figuring the driver was either asleep or inside the restroom building. I walked over to one of the vending machines, thinking I'd grab a snack. As I stood there, deciding between chips and a candy bar, I heard something. It was faint, but it was there. A kind of rustling sound, like someone walking through the bushes. I turned around, but there was nothing to see, just the dark shapes of the trees surrounding the rest stop. I told myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray dog. But then I heard it again, closer this time. It wasn't just rustling now. There was a distinct sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone trying to move quietly. My skin started to crawl, and I felt this chill run down my spine. I quickly bought my snack, grabbed it from the machine, and turned to head back to my truck. As I walked, I kept looking around, trying to see if there was anyone else there. The lot was still empty, and the only light was coming from the dim bulbs above the vending machines. I glanced over at the other truck again, but there was no movement, no sign of life. I got back to my truck and climbed into the cab, locking the doors behind me. I sat there for a minute, listening, but everything was quiet again. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was late, I was tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I unwrapped my snack and took a bite, trying to shake off the weird feeling. Just as I was starting to relax, there was a noise, a soft tapping sound coming from outside. I froze, listening. The tapping continued, rhythmic, like someone gently knocking on a door. I leaned forward, peering out the windshield, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. My heart was starting to race, and I felt that chill again, like something wasn't right. The tapping stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then I heard it again, this time from the side of the truck. It was closer now, like someone was right outside, tapping on the metal. I felt a surge of panic. I reached over and grabbed a flashlight I keep in the cab, flicking it on. I shined the light out the window, sweeping it across the lot. That's when I saw him. A man standing by the back of my truck, just at the edge of the light. He was facing me, his features obscured by the darkness. He was tall, wearing a jacket and a hat, and he just stood there, not moving, not saying anything. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady, as I called out, asking him what he wanted. He didn't respond, just kept standing there, staring. I felt my hands shaking, and I gripped the flashlight tighter, trying to think of what to do. My phone was in the cab, but there was no signal out here. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with this stranger just standing there, watching me. After what felt like an eternity, The man took a step back, then another, and disappeared into the shadows at the edge of the lot. I sat there, my heart pounding, waiting to see if he'd come back, but the darkness swallowed him up, and I couldn't see or hear anything. I felt like I was in a nightmare, trapped in my truck with no way to call for help. I stayed there for a while, gripping the flashlight, my eyes darting around the lot, searching for any sign of movement. I thought about starting the truck and driving off, but I was afraid the noise might bring him back, might draw him closer. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that maybe he was just a homeless guy looking for some change or food. But something about the way he stood there, so still, so silent, sent shivers down my spine. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out of there. I started the engine, the noise breaking the silence like a clap of thunder. I flicked on the headlights, flooding the lot with light, but there was no one there. I took a deep breath, put the truck in gear, and pulled out of the rest stop, my eyes constantly flicking to the mirrors, checking for any sign of the man. As I drove down the highway, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing in the middle of the road, or worse, following me. But the road was empty, just the dark trees and the faint outline of the moon behind the clouds. I drove for miles before I finally felt safe enough to pull over at another rest stop, this one well lit and with a few other trucks parked nearby. I parked next to another semi, the presence of other people making me feel a little more secure. I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like those eyes were still on me, following me through the night. I sat in the cab for a long time, my mind replaying what had happened over and over. Who was that man? Why was he just standing there, watching me? I couldn't figure it out, and the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. It was like he'd come out of nowhere, a shadow that had stepped into the light for just a moment before vanishing again. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see that man's face staring back at me. When morning finally came, I was exhausted, but I felt a little better with the daylight. I finished my delivery and headed back home, trying to put the whole thing behind me. I told a few friends about what happened, but they just shrugged it off, saying it was probably just a drifter or some weirdo. But I know what I felt that night. It wasn't just a random encounter. There was something off about that man, something that didn't feel right. To this day, I still get nervous whenever I have to stop at a rest area in the middle of nowhere. I make sure to park close to other vehicles, under the brightest lights I can find, and I never leave my cab without checking my surroundings first. That night left a mark on me, a sense of unease that's never really gone away. Maybe it was nothing, just a strange coincidence, or maybe there was something more to it. I don't know. All I know is that feeling of being watched, of seeing that figure in the dark, is something I'll never forget. And every time I pass by a rest stop on a lonely stretch of highway, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, wondering if he's still out there, waiting in the shadows. You know how some people have that one story they always tell at parties? That one experience that's so strange or unsettling it sticks with them for years? Well, this is mine. I don't share it often, but every time I pass a truck stop late at night, I can't help but remember what happened that one time I was out on the road. I used to drive a lot for work, long-haul trucking jobs that would keep me away from home for days, sometimes weeks, at a time. It wasn't the worst gig, good money, and I actually enjoyed the quiet of being out on the highway with nothing but the hum of the engine and the open road ahead. But those long stretches could get lonely, especially when you've been driving for hours and hadn't seen another car in miles. This happened about 5 years ago. I was hauling a load across a few states, from the Midwest to the East Coast. It was one of those trips where the dispatcher overestimates how much you can get done in a day, so I was pushing myself to make up time. I'd been on the road since early morning, and by the time night fell, I was somewhere in the middle of Pennsylvania, on a 2-lane highway that cut through thick forests on both sides. I remember feeling exhausted, my eyes heavy, and my mind starting to wander. I knew I needed to take a break, maybe grab a coffee or stretch my legs. I saw a sign for a truck stop coming up, one of those old ones that don't show up on GPS anymore, and decided that was as good a place as any to pull over. The truck stop was small, just a diner, a gas station, and a parking area for trucks. The neon sign for the diner flickered, half the letters burnt out, but There was a dim glow that was enough to catch my attention. I pulled my rig into the parking area, which was mostly empty except for a couple of other trucks, and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was almost deafening. I got out, stretched my arms over my head, feeling my back crack. The air was cold, much colder than I'd expected for that time of year, and there was a thick mist hanging over the ground, making everything look blurry. I shrugged it off as just another weird night on the road and headed towards the diner. Inside, the place looked like it hadn't changed in decades. Old vinyl booths, faded posters on the walls, and a counter with a row of stools. There was a lone waitress behind the counter, an older woman who looked like she'd seen everything there was to see in life. She gave me a tired smile as I walked in, and I nodded at her before taking a seat at one of the booths. I ordered a coffee, black, and looked around. The only other customers were a couple of guys sitting at a table near the back. They looked like truckers, big guys in flannel shirts, caps pulled low over their eyes. They were talking in low voices, too low for me to hear. One of them glanced over at me as I sat down. Just a quick look, but it sent a chill through me. His eyes were dark, almost black, and there was something about his expression that made me uneasy. The waitress brought me my coffee, and I sipped it slowly, trying to shake off the feeling. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. Typical. I put it back in my pocket and stared out the window, watching the mist swirl under the yellow light of the diner's sign. After a few minutes, one of the truckers stood up and walked towards the bathroom, which was down a narrow hallway at the back of the diner. The other guy stayed at the table, watching him go. Then he turned his gaze back to me, staring openly now. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my coffee, but I could feel his eyes on me, and it made my skin crawl. I'd been in plenty of truck stops, met all kinds of people on the road, but this felt different. There was a tension in the air, like something was about to snap. I thought about finishing my coffee and getting back on the road, but I didn't want to seem like I was running away. Besides, I still needed to stretch my legs. After a couple more minutes, I decided to use the bathroom. I got up, nodding at the waitress again as I headed down the hallway. The lighting back there was dim, almost flickering, and the walls were lined with old photographs of the diner from decades past. As I passed by, I noticed that one of the photos showed a group of truckers standing in front of the diner, smiling at the camera. It was an old black and white photo, probably from the 50s or 60s, and something about the smiles on those men's faces sent a shiver down my spine. I reached the bathroom and pushed the door open. It was small, just a single stall and a sink, with a flickering light bulb overhead. The guy who'd gone in earlier was nowhere to be seen. The bathroom was empty. I stood there for a moment, confused. There was no way he could have come out without me seeing him, and there were no windows or other doors. I checked the stall, empty. I even looked under the sink, like some sort of hidden compartment might be there. Nothing. My heart started to race. I felt this wave of unease wash over me, and I decided I needed to get out of there, fast. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw him. The other trucker, the one who'd been staring at me, was standing in the hallway, blocking the way out. His face was blank, no expression, just those dark eyes fixed on me. I took a step back, my mind racing, trying to figure out what was going on. The trucker didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, staring. I opened my mouth to say something, maybe ask if he was looking for his friend, but the words got caught in my throat. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back towards the diner, disappearing around the corner. I waited a moment, listening, but all I could hear was the faint hum of the diner's lights. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the bathroom, walking quickly back to my booth. The diner was empty. The waitress was gone, the other trucker was gone, and the place was completely silent. I looked around, my heart pounding. Where the hell did everyone go? I felt a chill run down my spine. I grabbed my coffee cup, still half full, and threw some money on the table, more than enough to cover it. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. I walked out of the diner, into the misty night, and headed straight for my truck. The parking lot was empty, except for my rig and a couple of others parked at the far end. I climbed into the cab, locking the door behind me, and started the engine. The sound of the engine roaring to life was a relief, breaking the eerie silence that had settled around me. I glanced in the side mirror as I pulled out of the parking lot. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing near the edge of the lot, just a shadow in the mist. But when I looked again, there was nothing. Just the fog and the glow of the diner's sign fading into the distance. I drove for miles, trying to put as much distance between me and that place as I could. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Where did that guy go? Where did the waitress go? I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see headlights following me, but the road was empty. After a couple of hours, I finally pulled into a rest area, somewhere along the interstate. There were a few other trucks parked there, and I felt a little safer. I killed the engine, climbed into the sleeper cab, and tried to get some rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's dark eyes, staring at me, unblinking. I told myself it was just a weird night, just some strange coincidence, but deep down I knew it was more than that. Something wasn't right at that diner. Maybe it was just those two truckers messing with me, trying to scare me, but it felt like more than that, like there was something in the air, something that wanted me to leave and never come back. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I'm out on the road, passing by another small, rundown truck stop. I always wonder if there's something hiding in the shadows, something waiting for the right person to wander in. I've learned to trust my gut, to listen to that feeling of unease when it creeps up on me, and I've never gone back to that stretch of highway, never looked for that diner again. Maybe it's still there, maybe it's not, but one thing's for sure, I'll never forget those eyes, staring at me from the darkness, telling me to leave before it's too late. I've always been a bit of a night owl. There's something about the quiet and stillness of late nights that I find comforting. Maybe it's the empty roads, the silence that lets you think, or the feeling that the whole world is asleep and you're the only one awake. It's a strange kind of freedom. That's why I didn't mind taking the late shifts at work or running errands after dark. It felt natural to me, almost peaceful. But there was this one time, a couple of years ago, when being out late at night turned into something I'll never forget. It still makes me uneasy whenever I think about it, and I've become a lot more cautious since then. It all started with a road trip I took by myself. I was heading out to visit a friend who lived in a small town about 5 hours away. I had some time off work, and I figured it'd be a nice drive. I've always loved long drives. Just me and the open road, music playing, nothing to worry about. I left late in the afternoon, so I knew I'd be driving through the night. No big deal. I'd done it plenty of times before. The first couple of hours were fine. I took the highway out of the city, and as the sun set, the traffic thinned out. I found myself on a 2-lane road that cut through the countryside, with fields stretching out on either side. It was one of those perfect summer nights, warm with a light breeze, and the sky was clear, full of stars. About 3 hours into the drive, I realized I was running low on gas. I hadn't seen a gas station for miles, so when I finally spotted a sign for one up ahead, I was relieved. The sign looked old and faded, the kind of place that's probably been around for decades. A small stop on the side of the road for truckers and the occasional traveler. As I got closer, I could see the dim lights of the gas station, a small building with a couple of pumps outside. There were no other cars, just an old truck parked near one of the pumps. The whole place looked like it had been forgotten by time, with peeling paint on the building and a faded open sign hanging crookedly in the window. I pulled up to one of the pumps and got out of my car, stretching my legs. The air was still, and the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights above the pumps. As I started to fill up my tank, I noticed the truck parked next to me. It was one of those big rigs, a long-haul truck with a trailer hitched to the back. The cab was old, with rust patches and chipped paint, like it had been on the road for years. The windows were tinted so I couldn't see inside, but something about it made me uneasy. It was just sitting there, engine off, no sign of the driver. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe the driver was inside the gas station, getting something to eat or taking a break. I finished pumping gas, replaced the nozzle, and went inside to pay. The inside of the gas station was just as run down as the outside, with flickering lights and shelves that looked like they hadn't been restocked in a while. There was a small counter at the back, and behind it, an older man was sitting, reading a newspaper. I walked up to the counter and he looked up, giving me a nod. I paid for the gas and grabbed a bottle of water from a cooler by the door. As I turned to leave, I asked him if he'd seen the truck driver. He just shrugged and said he hadn't noticed anyone come in. I thanked him, trying to ignore the knot of unease in my stomach, and headed back to my car. As I walked out, I glanced over at the truck again. It was still there, engine off, cab dark. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that there were eyes behind those tinted windows, following my every move. I quickened my pace, got into my car, and locked the doors. I started the engine and pulled out of the gas station, glancing back in my rearview mirror. The truck didn't move, just sat there, like a silent shadow. I drove back onto the road, trying to forget about the truck and focus on the drive. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a trucker taking a break. But as the miles passed, that feeling of unease stayed with me. I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see the truck behind me. About 20 minutes later, my heart skipped a beat. In the distance, I saw headlights, and as they got closer, I realized it was the truck from the gas station. There was no mistaking it. The same rust patches, the same chipped paint. It was driving at a steady speed, slowly gaining on me. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe the driver had finished his break and was back on the road. But something about the way the truck was moving, the way it seemed to glide along the road, felt wrong. I pressed down on the gas, speeding up, but the truck matched my pace, staying a constant distance behind me. The road was dark, no other cars in sight, just me and that truck, the headlights glaring in my rearview mirror, following my every move. I could feel my pulse quickening, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. I decided to test it out to see if the truck was really following me. I slowed down, and so did the truck. I sped up, and the truck did the same. Panic started to set in. I didn't know what to do. I was miles away from the nearest town, out in the middle of nowhere. My phone had no signal, so calling for help wasn't an option. I took a deep breath, trying to think. Maybe if I pulled over, let the truck pass, it would just go on its way. I slowed down, pulling off to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. The truck slowed down too, stopping a few feet behind me. The headlights were blinding, and I couldn't see the driver's face. I sat there, frozen, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, the truck's horn blared, a loud, grating sound that echoed through the night. My heart was racing now, fear creeping in. I didn't know what the driver wanted, but I knew I didn't want to stick around to find out. I hit the gas, pulling back onto the road, the truck's horn blaring again behind me. The truck followed, staying close, headlights glaring in my mirror. I drove faster, trying to put some distance between us, but the truck kept up, never falling back, never pulling ahead. It was like a shadow, glued to my bumper. I spotted a sign up ahead for a rest stop and took the exit, hoping there'd be other people there, maybe some help. I pulled into the parking lot, but it was empty. Just a few cars parked with no sign of their owners. I pulled into a space, keeping the engine running, and watched as the truck pulled in behind me, stopping a few spaces away. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding, and I felt trapped. The truck just sat there, engine idling, headlights still on. I couldn't see the driver, couldn't make out any details. It was just a silhouette, dark and menacing. I reached for my phone, hoping for a signal, but there was nothing. I was on my own. I thought about getting out, trying to make a run for it, but I didn't know where to go. The rest stop was deserted, no one around to help. I felt a wave of panic rising, and I knew I had to do something. I took a deep breath, put my car in gear, and sped out of the parking lot, back onto the road. The truck followed, its engine roaring as it pulled out behind me. I pushed my car to its limits, speeding down the highway, the truck's headlights blinding in my mirror. I didn't care about the speed limits or anything else. I just wanted to get away. Finally, I saw the lights of a town up ahead. Relief washed over me, and I headed straight for the main road, hoping to lose the truck in the traffic. I swerved onto a busy street, weaving through cars, the truck still behind me but struggling to keep up. I saw a police station up ahead, a beacon of safety, and I floored it, pulling into the parking lot. I jumped out of my car, running to the door, and burst inside, shouting for help. The officers inside looked at me, confused, and I tried to explain about the truck, about how it had been following me. They went outside, but when they looked, the truck was gone. There was no sign of it, no headlights, nothing. I felt a mixture of relief and fear. Maybe the truck driver had realized where I was headed and decided to back off. Maybe he was still out there, watching, waiting for another chance. The police took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. Without a license plate or a clear description, they couldn't track the truck down. I ended up staying in town that night, too scared to keep driving. I called my friend and explained what had happened. The next day, I took the main highways, sticking to well-lit areas with plenty of traffic. I made it to my friend's place without any more incidents, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. To this day, I don't know who was driving that truck or why they were following me. Maybe it was just some random creep, or maybe there was more to it. I've thought about it a lot since then, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away, if I hadn't found that police station. It's a question that keeps me up at night sometimes. Since then, I've been a lot more cautious on the road. I stick to busy highways, avoid driving late at night if I can, and always make sure my phone is charged and has a signal. I used to love the feeling of the open road, the freedom of being out there alone. But now, every time I see a big rig in my rearview mirror, I can't help but feel a shiver of fear. It's a reminder that no matter how empty the road may seem, you're never really alone out there.